Valorian had not felt the weight of his own body in so long that he almost forgot what it meant to be tired. His massive scales, once bright like polished metal under starlight, had turned dull and gray. The great dragon drifted through the darkness of space, his wings folded against his sides, and his eyes were empty of the fire that once made entire worlds fear his name. 1,000 years ago, Valorian commanded respect across 3 star systems. He ruled from a fortress made of crystalline stone, and his hoard of treasures filled caverns so vast that even dragons needed hours to walk from one end to the other. Kings bowed before him. Warriors trembled at the sound of his voice. Other dragons looked to him for wisdom and strength. He had been someone. He had been important. Now, he was nothing. The wars had taken everything. First came the invasion from the northern colonies. Dragons who wanted to expand their territory and take what Valorian had built. Then came the plague that spread through the dragon caves, a sickness brought by traders from distant worlds. Valorian watched his kind grow weak and die. He tried to save them, but he was not a healer. He was a warrior, and there was nothing to fight except time itself. And you could not defeat time with teeth and claws. One by one, the dragons he loved fell into the long sleep that never ended. His mate was first. His children followed. The younger dragons grew desperate and fled to other worlds, seeking refuge where the plague had not yet reached. Valorian stayed in the fortress for 100 years, hoping they would return, but they never did. Eventually, even hope became too heavy to carry Dot, so Valorian left the fortress and flew into space. He had no destination. He did not care where he went. The stars all looked the same when you stopped caring about anything. He drifted between worlds, taking no food, barely sleeping. His body was so large that he could go months without eating, but eventually, hunger found him anyway. That was when he spotted the blue and green planet below, floating in the darkness like a jewel someone had. Dropped and forgotten Dot, the planet was called Earth. Valorian did not know this at first. He only knew that when he entered the atmosphere, something in the air felt different. It was thick and heavy and full of smells he had never known before. The gravity was weak, almost gentle compared to the homeworld of the dragons. As he descended through the clouds, he saw forests and mountains and water stretching across the surface in patterns that almost seemed beautiful. If he still had the part of himself that noticed beauty, he crashed into a mountain range, his landing hard and rough. He did not care about the pain. Pain meant he was still alive, and being alive meant nothing to him anymore, so one thing canceled out the other. His massive body created a trench through the earth and stone, and trees broke like small twigs beneath his weight. When he finally stopped moving, he lay in the middle of a forest, breathing slowly, and wondered if he should just stay there and let the world take him. But hunger spoke louder than sadness. After a few days of lying still, Valorian pulled himself up. His wings were torn, and his left leg ached where he had struck a boulder. He walked forward without thinking, without planning. He was moving only because his body knew how to do that one thing. The forest was thick with trees, and the ground was covered in soft green things called moss and grass. Colorful small creatures flew between the branches, and Valorian did not even notice them. They were too small to eat, and he was not really interested in eating anyway. He moved forward because his legs continued to move, and that was all Dot. Then he saw the building Dot at first. Valorian thought it was a human den. Humans, he knew, built small structures to live in. He had encountered them once, thousands of years ago, when they were still figuring out how to make fire. The memory was so old that it felt like it had happened to someone else. Humans were weak creatures, short-lived and fragile. They broke easily. Some dragons hunted them for sport, but Valorian had never cared much for it. Where was the honor in hunting prey that could not fight back? But this building was different from the human dens he remembered. It was very large, with walls made of wood and stone, and it had many windows. Glass covered the windows, and through the glass, Valorian could see light glowing from inside. The building seemed to grow out of the forest, with vines and moss covering much of the outer walls. It looked old, very old, perhaps older than the humans who lived on this planet. Valorian did not approach the building openly. Something in him, some old instinct from the time when he cared about survival, made him move carefully. He stayed in the shadows of the trees and looked through the windows from far away. What he saw inside made no sense. The building was filled with small objects. They were rectangular, with hard covers, and they were stacked on shelves that went from the floor all the way to the ceiling. There were so many of them that Valorian could not count them all. He had never seen anything like it. What were they? What did humans do with so many small objects? It looked like a hoard, but a hoard of what? They had no value that he could see. Through one of the large windows, Valorian could see an old human moving between the shelves. The human was very small, even for a human, with white hair and bent shoulders. The human was holding one of the small objects and running thin fingers along its edge. Very carefully, very gently, as if the object might break if he held it wrong. The old human climbed a ladder, placed the object on a high shelf with many others, and then climbed back down. He stood for a moment, looking at what he had done, and then moved to the next shelf to do the same thing again. Over and over, the human repeated this motion. Place an object. Step back. Look at it. Move to the next shelf. Valorian watched for a long time. The human worked without stopping, without complaining. The human was alone in this strange place filled with small rectangular objects. The human was old and moved slowly, but he continued working anyway. And Valorian, the great dragon who had once ruled 3 star systems, felt something strange move inside his chest. It was not quite curiosity. It was not quite sadness. It was something smaller and quieter than either of those things, but something that made him want to understand why this small human was doing this small work with such care and such patience. Valorian waited until the sun fell below the horizon before he moved. The night was dark and heavy, and the human inside the building had finally stopped working. Lights had gone out in the upper part of the structure, though a single lamp still burned in a back room. The dragon crawled forward slowly, his massive body pushing against tree trunks and breaking branches. He tried to be quiet, but a creature of his size could never truly hide. Everything he touched bent or broke or fell. He reached the side of the building and peered through a window. What he saw was a large open space filled with those small rectangular objects he had noticed before. Now he could see them more clearly. Each one had words printed on its cover in human language. These were books. Even though Valorian had not thought about books in centuries, the word came to him automatically. Books were things humans collected and read and valued. He had always found this strange. Words could be spoken. Why did humans need to write them down and carry them around? The dragon moved carefully to the nearest door and pushed against it with his snout. The door was made of wood, and it was not locked. It opened easily, and Valorian squeezed himself inside the building, his body scraping against the frame. His wings could not fit, so he left them outside, pressed against the wall. It was a strange feeling to have part of himself exposed in this way, but it was the only way he could fit through the door. Inside the building, Valorian's eyes adjusted to the darkness. The smell of paper and dust and old wood filled his nose. The books were everywhere, stacked on shelves and piled on tables. There was a silence in the building that felt almost sacred, as if sound itself was not allowed here. The dragon moved forward carefully, and his tail knocked over a stack of books. The sound was very loud in the quiet place. He froze, waiting for danger, but nothing came. Then a door opened, and light flooded into the room. An old human stood in the doorway, holding a lamp. The human was very small, much smaller than Valorian had realized from the window. The human's white hair fell across his face, and his eyes were wide with surprise, but not with fear. The dragon waited for the human to scream or run away, but the old man did neither of these things. Walter Graham had lived alone in the library for 50 years. He had seen many strange things in his time, and he had learned that fear was a waste of energy. He looked at the dragon, and he looked at the pile of books on the floor, and he understood immediately what had happened. A creature had come to his library, and his books had fallen. Walter set down the lamp and bent over slowly to pick up the fallen books. He did this very carefully, dusting each one before stacking them again on the table. Valorian watched, confused. The human was not calling for help. The human was not running. The human was simply picking up the books as if a dragon falling through his door was an ordinary thing. When Walter had finished with the books, he looked up at the dragon again. The old human's eyes were tired but kind. He did not smile, but there was no anger in his face either. "You are hurt," Walter said simply. His voice was soft but clear. "And you are looking for shelter." Valorian did not answer. He had not spoken to any living creature in more than a decade. Speech seemed unnecessary for a being who no longer cared about being alive. Walter walked forward, and Valorian could have crushed him with one claw. But Walter showed no fear. He simply approached and looked at the dragon's torn wings and bleeding leg. "Come," Walter said. "The main room is larger. You will fit better there." The old human turned and walked deeper into the building, assuming the dragon would follow. Valorian found himself following, though he did not understand why. The dragon squeezed his body through a doorway and entered a vast hall. This room was enormous, with shelves reaching up to a ceiling so high that Valorian could stand on his hind legs and barely touch it. Books covered every wall, every inch of available space. More books than Valorian could have counted in a month. More books than should have existed in the world. Walter gestured to a corner of the room that was empty except for a pile of soft cloth. "You can rest here," the old human said. "I will bring water. You need to drink after traveling so far." Valorian lay down on the cloth. It was softer than anything he had felt in many years. Walter left and came back with a large container filled with water. The dragon drank deeply. The water was cool and clean and tasted like something good that still existed in the world. The old human sat down on a chair across from the dragon, his joints making soft sounds as he moved. He was obviously tired, but he did not leave. "What is your name?" Walter asked. "Valorian," the dragon said. His voice came out rough and broken from lack of use. "I am Walter Graham," the human replied. "I tend to this library. It is a place where knowledge is kept, where books are preserved so that they are not lost." Walter looked around at the thousands of books surrounding them. "I have spent my whole life saving them from destruction. Many people think this is foolish. They say books are not important, that spending 50 years in this forest with paper and ink is a waste of time. But I believe they are wrong." Valorian did not respond. He did not care about books or knowledge or preservation. None of those things mattered anymore. Walter stood up slowly. "You can stay here for as long as you need. There is a stream not far from here if you need more water. And Valorian, though you may not believe it now, sleep helps. Sleep is one of the few gifts the world still gives us." The old human reached out and touched the dragon's scaled head very gently. Then he turned off the lamp and left Valorian in the darkness. The dragon lay in the empty corner of the library, surrounded by thousands of books. And for the first time in many years, he did not think about dying. He simply slept. 3 days passed before Valorian picked up his first book. Walter had left the dragon alone in the library, coming only with food and water. The old human did not try to make conversation or force the dragon to talk. He simply left the supplies in the corner and walked back to his room. But on the fourth day, when Valorian had nothing to do and the silence was pressing down on him like weight, he reached out a claw and pulled a book from the nearest shelf. The book was heavy in his claw. He turned it over and read the title. It was about human history, about how humans had begun as simple creatures without tools or language and had slowly learned to build civilizations. Valorian opened it and began to read. At first, he read without thinking, treating the book like food that he was eating only because he was hungry. The words passed through his mind like clouds passing across the sky. But slowly, something changed. The words began to mean something. The stories began to matter. Valorian read about humans who lived in caves, who hunted large animals with only sharp rocks tied to sticks. These humans were so small and weak, yet they survived. They fed their children and protected them and taught the next generation what they had learned. The dragons had never done this. Dragons born with the knowledge already inside them, instincts that guided them. But humans had to teach and learn and pass knowledge from one generation to the next. It seemed like such a difficult way to live. He read about the first civilizations, about humans who built cities and governments and systems to help each other survive. Some of these stories were about war and cruelty, but many were about cooperation and building and creating things of beauty. Humans wrote music. Humans painted pictures. Humans made poetry. They did these things even when they were hungry or tired or afraid. On the 10th day, Valorian finished his first book and picked up another. This one was about space exploration. He read about humans who had worked for centuries to understand the stars. They had started with simple telescopes and gradual discoveries, and through decades of hard work and many failures, they had finally built machines that could carry them away from their home world. Every rocket that exploded, every attempt that failed, taught humans something new. They never gave up. They never stopped trying. Walter noticed the empty books and began leaving selections for Valorian to read. He left books about art and philosophy, about science and adventure. He left biographies of humans who had done impossible things. Explorers who crossed vast oceans without knowing what they would find. Scientists who worked alone in laboratories for years before making discoveries that changed the world. Artists who created beauty in times of great darkness. One evening, Valorian asked Walter a question. "Why do you save these?" The dragon asked, gesturing at the books surrounding them. "Humans die so quickly. Your entire civilizations last only a few thousand years. Why spend your life preserving words that will eventually be forgotten?" Walter was sitting in his old chair, reading by lamplight. He looked up at the dragon over the top of his book. "Because of exactly that," Walter said. "Because humans do not live very long, everything we create matters more, not less. We have such a short time to understand things, to grow, to help each other. We pass what we learn to the next generation through books. Without books, every human would have to start from the beginning, learning again what was already learned. We would never progress. We would never go anywhere. Dragons live for thousands of years," Valorian said. "And in all that time, I never thought about things the way humans do. I accepted what was. I did not wonder about what could be. Wondering is courage," Walter said. "It takes more strength to ask questions than to accept answers. You lived for thousands of years, but you learned nothing new. A human lives for 80 years and discovers entire worlds inside books. The human wins." Valorian thought about this for a long time. It was true. Even in his long life, he had stopped learning after the first few centuries. He had stopped asking questions. He had accepted his power as enough. But his power had not protected his family from plague. His power had not stopped the wars that destroyed his people. His power had been meaningless when what truly mattered was the ability to care and to learn, and to hope. He began reading constantly after that. Walter brought him books and Valorian read them all. He read about human scientists who studied disease and found ways to heal it. He read about humans who had given their lives to help others. He read about small acts of kindness that had changed the course of history. One book was about a human named Marie. She was a scientist who discovered something called radioactivity. The work was difficult and dangerous, and it hurt her body. But she continued because she believed the knowledge was important. She wanted to help people. She died from her work, but her discovery saved countless lives. She lived only 66 years, but accomplished more than Valorian had in 1,000 years. Why? Valorian asked Walter after finishing that book. Why would she give her life for knowledge? Because, Walter said quietly, she understood that some things are more important than living. Some things are worth more than safety or comfort or even life itself. Meaning, purpose, knowing that you mattered, that you helped, that you made the world better than you found it. Valorian looked at the old human, and for the first time, he felt something breaking inside his chest. It was not pain exactly, but it was not comfort either. It was the beginning of caring about something again. It was the beginning of wanting something again. It was the beginning of remembering why living mattered. Weeks turned into months. Valorian had been in the library for 3 seasons when Walter brought in a new shipment of books. The old human drove a small vehicle to a nearby town and returned with boxes filled with rescued volumes. Many of these books had been thrown away. They were marked for destruction, destined to be burned or buried in landfills. But Walter had found them and saved them. The dragon watched as Walter unpacked each book carefully. The old human ran his hands over the covers, cleaned dust from the pages, and examined any damage. For books that were torn or wet or falling apart, Walter began the work of repair. He glued pages back together. He replaced broken covers. He worked slowly and with great care, as if each book was precious and important and worth saving. Valorian asked if he could help. Together, the dragon and the human worked on the books. Valorian's claws were too large for the detailed work, but he could carry heavy boxes and carefully hold pages steady while Walter made repairs. For the first time in his life, the dragon felt like his strength meant something. Not strength for fighting or conquering, but strength for helping, for building, for saving things that mattered. One book Walter saved had been especially damaged. Its cover was almost completely gone, and many pages were stained and torn. Walter spent 2 days working on it, carefully drying each page, pressing them flat, and slowly rebuilding the binding. Valorian watched and asked why Walter was spending so much time on one book when there were hundreds more that needed help. Because, Walter said, this book contains the life work of a human named Samuel. He was a naturalist who studied birds for 50 years. He painted pictures of birds no one had ever documented before. His work was forgotten after he died. This book was all that remained of what he did. If I let this burn, Samuel will be completely forgotten. But if I save this, someone in the future might read about his work and understand what he saw. He will not be forgotten. He will matter. Valorian felt something shift in his understanding. All his life, he had measured importance by power and control. The more he could dominate, the more important he was. But Walter was teaching him a different way of thinking. A human was important not because of how many other creatures he could command, but because of what he created, what he protected, what he taught others. The dragon thought about his own life. He had ruled kingdoms, but what had he created? What had he taught? What remained of his existence besides memory of his own power? Meanwhile, an old human in a forest library was making sure that the works of dead humans would continue to exist. Samuel the naturalist would live on through his book. Marie the scientist would continue to help people even though she had been dead for 100 years. The humans understood something the dragons had forgotten. Valorian walked to the shelves and pulled down a book about dragon history. It was one of the few books in the library that mentioned dragons at all. The author had lived 500 years ago and had written about dragons as destroyers and hoarders. The book described dragons as beautiful but soulless, creatures of pure instinct without depth or feeling. Valorian had always known the description was incomplete, but now he understood how incomplete it was. "Humans know nothing about us," he said to Walter. "No," Walter agreed. "Not really. But if you wanted humans to understand, you could teach them. You could write your own story. You could show them what dragons are really like." The idea struck Valorian like lightning. He could write. He had never thought to do such a thing, but he could. He could tell humans about dragon children learning from their mothers, about dragons who had created art and music, about the plague that had destroyed his people, about the beauty and the sadness and the love that humans thought dragons did not possess. "When you write," Walter said, "you reach across time, the same way humans do through books. You become immortal. Your words will still be speaking long after you are gone. That is why books matter. That is why I save them." Valorian realized something profound then. He had spent 1,000 years accumulating things, but accumulation was not immortality. A hoard could be stolen. A fortress could be destroyed. Power could be taken away. But words, ideas, knowledge, meaning, these things could not be destroyed. They passed from one mind to another like fire passing from one candle to the next. They grew stronger every time someone read them. They lived. The dragon looked at the old human, and he understood that Walter was giving him more than shelter. Walter was teaching him how to live in a way that meant something. Not by dominating, but by creating. Not by taking, but by preserving. Not by being strong, but by caring enough to work when everything else seemed pointless. "Why did you not send me away?" Valorian asked. "When I crashed into your building, you could have been afraid. You could have called for help to drive me out." Walter smiled. It was the first time Valorian had seen him smile, and it changed his entire face. "Because I recognize despair," Walter said. "I spent many years in despair myself, before I found this library. I know what it feels like to think that nothing matters anymore. But I learned that despair is a lie. Everything matters. Every act of creation, every preservation, every moment you choose to care instead of giving up, it all matters. You came to my library as a creature broken by loss. But you are not broken anymore. You are here, saving books with me, and that means you have remembered something important. You have remembered how to hope." Valorian looked around at the thousands of books, at the small human who had spent 50 years saving knowledge, and he understood. The dragon had been lost, but he had not been lost in space. He had been lost in his own emptiness. Walter had found him not with strength or magic, but with books and patience and the simple example of a life lived with meaning. And now, Valorian wanted to learn everything. He wanted to understand why humans were so strong despite their fragility. He wanted to become someone who created instead of destroyed. He wanted to matter. 1 year after Valorian arrived at the library, Walter asked the dragon a question while they were organizing a new section. "Will you stay?" the old human asked. "I know you came here by accident, lost and broken. But will you stay now by choice?" Valorian looked at the old human. Walter was even more bent now, moving more slowly and sometimes pausing to catch his breath. The dragon could see that the old human did not have many years left. In perhaps 10 or 20 years at most, Walter would be gone. But the library would remain. The books would remain. The work would remain. "I will stay," Valorian said, "as long as you need me. And after that, if you will allow it, I will keep the library going. I will continue what you have started." Walter's eyes filled with tears. He reached out and touched the dragon's scaled head, the way he did every day. "That is all I ever wanted," Walter said. "To know that someone else cared enough to continue. You have given me everything, Valorian." In the months that followed, Valorian threw himself into the work of the library. He became stronger and healthier as he did. His scales began to shine again. The sadness did not leave him completely, but it was no longer the only thing inside him. Now there was also purpose. Now there was meaning. Valorian began writing his own book. He worked slowly, carefully, translating human language and dragon knowledge into words that would make sense to anyone who read them. He wrote about his 1,000 years of life. He wrote about the wars and the plague and the loss of his family. He wrote about the despair that had nearly consumed him. And he wrote about finding Walter in the library and discovering that curiosity was not a weakness. It was salvation. The book grew over many months. Valorian filled pages with stories of dragon culture, dragon history, and dragon feelings. He wrote about dragon mothers teaching their young to fly, about dragon artists creating sculptures of light and shadow, about dragon philosophers who'd spent centuries thinking about the meaning of existence. He wrote about a people who had forgotten how to wonder, and how that forgetting had nearly destroyed them. Walter read each chapter as Valorian finished it. The old human offered suggestions and corrections. He pointed out places where Valorian needed to explain more clearly, places where the dragon could describe emotions more deeply. Together, they shaped the book into something beautiful and true. By the time winter came again, Valorian noticed that Walter was failing. The old human still came to the library every day, but he spent more time resting now. His breathing was sometimes difficult. His hands shook when he held books. One evening, Walter sat in his chair and asked Valorian to read to him. The dragon took his book and began reading the chapters about his childhood, about flying with his mother for the first time, about the games young dragons played together under the stars. Walter listened with his eyes closed, occasionally smiling, and when the dragon finished reading, the old human was asleep. Valorian continued to watch over him. The dragon did not leave the library at night anymore. He stayed beside Walter's chair, keeping watch, ready to help if the old human needed anything. Sometimes, Valorian thought about his old fortress, about the treasure and the power and the respect he had commanded. None of it seemed important now. This moment, sitting with his friend in a quiet library, mattered far more than all his years of dominance. Walter died peacefully 3 weeks before spring arrived. He fell asleep one evening and did not wake. Valorian found him in the morning, his body cold and still, his work finally finished. The dragon carried Walter to a place of honor in the forest, and he buried him near the stream. He gathered stones and built a monument, and he marked it with words carved in dragon script that Walter would not have been able to read. But the meaning was there. Here lies Walter Graham, who taught a dragon how to live. After that, Valorian became the keeper of the library. He worked every day organizing books, repairing damaged volumes, and searching for new books that people were throwing away. He became known in the nearby human towns as a strange guardian of a strange place. But humans began leaving books at the library's edge. People sensed that whoever cared for this place truly valued knowledge and preservation. Valorian finished his own book, and, with help from human scholars, he had copies made. He distributed them across the galaxy, to the few remaining dragons, and to humans, and to other species who might want to understand. In his book, Valorian told them all the truth that Walter had taught him. Curiosity was not weakness. Care was not shameful. The desire to create and preserve and help was the highest form of strength. Years passed. Valorian remained alone in the library, but he was not lonely. Walter's presence was everywhere in the books, in the organization, in the careful way each volume was preserved. The dragon continued to read and to learn and to write. He discovered that curiosity never ended. There was always something new to understand, always another book to read, always another mind from another time reaching across the years to touch his own. On quiet evenings, when Valorian would sit among the thousands of books, he would remember the dragon he had been when he first arrived. That Valorian had thought life was meaningless. That Valorian had believed nothing mattered. That Valorian had been slowly dying inside, even though he was still alive. But the Valorian who sat in the library now understood something different. He understood that every book was a human reaching across time. Every word was a human saying, "I was here. I thought this. I felt this. I want you to know." And every dragon and human and creature who read those words was answering, "Yes, I hear you. You mattered. You still matter. You will always matter." The library was not just a place of books. It was a place where loneliness ended. It was a place where meaning could be found. It was a place where a lost dragon had wandered and found not just shelter, but purpose. It was a place where an old human had spent 50 years saving knowledge. And now those 50 years would echo through eternity because someone cared enough to continue the work. And that, Valorian had learned, was what made life worth living.